Grazie infinite per questo. Thank you so much. Sorry, I was going on in Italian, but it's in English that we proceed. Thank you for this introduction. I'm so glad to be back here to meet you again for this second meeting and discussion about historical passages related to textile and fashion production throughout centuries. And today we will see how this phenomenon, so the fashion and textile phenomenon productions between countries and continents has impacted not only the economies, but also the most important phenomena that have characterized and still today they portray, they shape our societies as we know them. And we choose to use the topic of Orientalism as a way to go through ages, through civilizations, through different times in the history of European and Middle East and Asia countries, because it is a never-ending element, a never-ending evolution, and is so dense of incredible knowledges, exchanges, fascinating stories, and it's a fantastic way to interpret and review our past. Of course, we are going to discuss about this topic just from the point of view of the textile and clothing production. So it's important that we consider, we were discussing before we were online with you, with the colleague in the Italian Cultural Institute in Haifa, and the Orientalism is a topic that has a lot of definitions also related to society. It's a broad phenomenon, but we will look at it only as a fascination from the diverse to the diverse, and into from the East and the West point of view, having textiles and costume production in mind. Just in a technical way, we will do as last time. That means that we will have a first more or less 1 hour of discussion, a first topic that will end more or less around 7. Well, I'm 1 hour back in your time. So in 1 hour, we will have a short pause. You will be able, if you want to write down some questions or ask something, we will then continue for another half an hour until the end. And also at the end, 5 minutes of question time, and for you, for things that are not clear, or your contributions that are most welcomes. So as said, we are talking about Orientalism, which is the historical term used to describe West fascination and the assimilation of the ideas and styles from the East. There is a gold mine of material to define the resonance of East on the West and in the West culture. And it is what we are going to do, to discover and convey our relationships between the two poles, the two different areas of our known world, where we're building dialogues and creating cultural matters through fashion. This picture that I'm showing, it's kind of representative. We go straight in the middle of the 18th century, and it's a quite interesting to demonstrate how the fascination and the curiosity toward the East was resulting in the West communities and societies. So that, for example, here we have the representation of a fest, a ball of the Louis XIV, so Louis XIV, where all the attendants are dressed in different way, in curiosity. The definition that normally in France was given is the curiosité, so that it was people that were dressing in with turbans from the Turks, and these were gigantic, so they were not even in proportion, and so in a way that the Orientalism vogue was interpreted in the exaggerated way, in a exposure way. So there's certainly a vague notion of the East when the West looks and travels toward Asia, toward the Middle East, toward Northern Africa, towards India. So there's a remote and romantic world, exotically dressed, and that is far from a simple and unique interpretation and definition. The clothing imported and taken from faraway countries to the West were always, anyway, politically and economically charged. They were generating signs, means, and values for the West. The dress in the East is always perceived and then translated into the Western style. So the trade and colonialism, as we know them, they were founded on the Silk Roads and on the transaction of textiles. The wealth that many nations depended on, it was, sorry. So the wealth that many nations depended on was based on textiles, import and trade, and the design were exposed into European fairs, into commercial displays that consistently were pervasive into the attitude that West wanted to appropriate itself of the styles from the Asia without any specific framework. It was just bringing up new lines, new styles that were working and, of course, fascinating. This this is done by the help of explorers, missionaries, because there's a lot of travel done through and by the power boosted by religion. There are also traders and marketers. Silk roads brought to the West goods of indescribable luxury and beauty, but they also brought new-looking eyes on fashion and power for the West to learn and wealth. Orientalism represents thus a longing, an option, and a faraway perfection never to be achieved and never to be obtained. It's like an utopia and a picture that went everywhere and nowhere is still in the imagination, even up today. As we will see at the end, we will have some images from recent fashion catwalks and production. So in this picture where we see, we started also, we take it from last talk, we had, we discussed about the Italian production in the Middle Age, and we knew that we defined that there was a huge impact at the beginning of the year 1000, so in the early Middle Age, where Middle East and Occidental dress and textiles went into a constant osmosis that will never stop in the following 10 centuries. And this has been at the beginning an historical development that has been boosted by the Crusade, of course, but also that installment of the Silk Roads and the trades. And then after the 15th century, 16th century, by the growth of the colonies, by the markets opened by both British, Dutch, French colonies. So there is a cross-fertilization in textile production and in the Mediterranean Sea. So as we have understood, there's a huge and seamless market that from Europe through main cities in Italy, from the Middle Age up to the new industrialization, creates a network of exchanges that brings on the two poles, on multiple poles. It's like a spider net where trades and luxury goods were transported without stop. And we have seen that it was not only the Italian cities or republics like Venice, Genoa, that were building the major routes, but also the Hanseatic routes. So we see that also from north to south, there was a huge impact of the trades that were brought up by the northern countries toward the south. So exchange proliferated as empire prospered from the perfect orders. So it is important to understand is that from the perspective of the West world, that of course at the end of the Roman Empire, it was not yet the West as we define it, but it was a kind of the northern part of the Mediterranean Sea that was looking at the southern part and at the Middle East. That was the junction toward Asia and toward India. That was a huge fascination made and brought to Europe territories by the traders and by the Crusaders. So whenever they went back to Italy and to other cities, bringing beautiful textiles, then they were even bringing up cultures and values. But as significant factors in the impact of Orientalism on this fascination was this constant distance and the exclusion of the East from the Western gaze. The allure of the East has been partly and majorly based on the impenetrability to the West. So the West people that were not able to travel got so many input and fascinations from their accounts, from stories being told, and also from these reliquia, wonderful textiles being brought from the past, from the East. We know that since the late 13th century, Marco Polo brought the first marvels from China to the West, and thus East has provided a recurrent resuscitation of expansion of the Western dress. Textiles and dress were part of an economic system and by adventuring traders that created later what we know as colonialism. So what we know about the expressiveness of the East comes from basically what we have here as one of the first examples that has had an impact in the evolution of the textile or the fashion production in Europe through Italian territory, which is, as we have analyzed last time, this tunic found in Egypt that has this circular decoration and this small leaf decoration based on a white impact. This is a major element that we will see and found, because then the early textiles that are produced and are going to be traded from Italy, inspired by East and Middle East, they were just trying to reproduce this kind of circular decoration, and where an inscription of animals or flowers or vegetables elements, they branches, they were inscribed in circularly and regular elements. Sorry, my computer doesn't want to go up. Yeah. So what we know is also not only textiles were impacted, but also the way the clothes are built. So from the Egyptian and Middle East, but also from the late Roman time and Byzantium. So the way of draping textiles on the body had an impact also in areas far wider and broader than the original way it was constructed. So as we see in this Byzantine depiction, also we still that are dating from the early Middle Age, so at the 9th or 10th century after Christ, then we will notice that there is still an impact of the peplum or the chiton, so the classical way, the classical clothing draping on the body, loose and without construction, without shaping on the body. And also in this, finally, there are two dancing girls. This time is from Samarra in Iraq, and we still see that there is a similar shape, a similar way of treating the body in relationship to a fluid and flowing textile that is not constricting the body. As we see also in these pictures coming from, so a sculpture coming from Palmyra, and examples of textile, rounded and circular textile, and also this beautiful fresco that has been found in the central area, that was in the area where we're going to talk in a while. Sogdian's civilization was blooming. They were trading textiles, and these circular elements are still very much represented, and they are coming from a pattern that is has a huge influence, has received a huge influence directly from China. And this is where we go toward Europe. So when the first textiles were produced and developed in Italy or in Europe, they were it's still unclear if they either were produced in Central Asia or in Sicily or in Northern Africa. And this is by the means that we see the definition, this caption. This textile is in the collections of the MEIT, so the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And when they try to define, give a definition of where this textile was produced, we know that it is from the first half of the 13th century, but they still say it's Sicilian, North African, and Central Asia, which is a very telling way to understand that at that time in the early Middle Age, it was a unique general production ground where you couldn't draw borders, you would have artisan and craftsmen that were from Arabic world, from the Italian Sicilian area, and from the northern area of the African continent, and still they were sharing the same knowledge. So the band along its top edge loosely imitates an Arabic inscription. Such a large and rich silk have been preserved almost civilly in the great church and treasuries of Europe, because of course these were the most luxurious goods at the time, more valuables at times than weapons, and so they could cost a fortune. So only the Pope, only the kings and the emperors could afford, and that's why many of them had the possibility to be preserved. So the design, palette, and use of gold and inscription reflect the taste of fine textiles that extended outward from all the Mediterranean Sea basin. Another example, probably Sicilian, again in the Metropolitan Museum collections, and is still pairing, and we see again these globular and circular elements that we will investigate later. So we have discussed a lot about the Italian role in bringing and being a crucial traders and crucial elements bringing from Asia toward Europe, textiles and influences from other countries. But there is also, and it's important not to forget that other traders were important in these elements and in this movement, in this phenomenon. And for sure there was the Vikings, so those groups that were coming from the North Scandinavian peninsula, where we call that North interaction toward the East. Vikings were trading actively from the 8th, 9th century after Christ towards the first, almost for 300-400 years. What we have recently found, so these are a little bit the roads that led from the Baltic Sea to what is known today as Ukraine, and of course the Volga, so going through, following the river Volga, and then going towards the Caspian Sea. And then by that means, they were already able to they were just at the center of this huge trade interaction, where Samarkand was the core. And all around Samarkand is the territory that is called, where the civilization called of the Sogdians, is difficult to pronunciate, Sogdians, were a civilization of traders living in the center and around between Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and the area of Samarkand, where Vikings were being in contact. And so we have a recent study in this University of Uppsala in the north of Stockholm that showed that Viking chiefs and rulers were dressed and bared like Central Asian kings. This is one of the most fascinating results of a new review of material from the boat graves found in Uppsala, which is a city, an old city, and a burial ground found and known since many hundred years, but only recently textile archaeologists from the Uppsala University and found many unusually well-preserved remains of colorful silk fabrics with sophisticated patterns. These sophisticated patterns remember and remind a lot of these circular and decoration, the ones that we find in this Sogdian wall painting representing seated figures during a banquet. So Vikings were coming down and exchanging with this civilization of traders in the very core and Central Asia, to the point with the value brought by this Central Asia world that made it possible for Vikings, when they went back to their mainland in Scandinavia, then they wanted to be buried. So they in graves we have found them wearing exactly the same Persian inspired silk fabrics, and also typically Chinese silk. It shows that a kind of long distance contact between the Vikings and between the Central Asia communication was very rich and very impactful. They had a completely different international exchange than what we may have understood and known until now. We have found fabrics in which the Vikings were buried came mainly from the area called Sogdiana, which is the east of the Caspian Sea. So if we know the Caspian Sea, so then we will, it's where we see now the word Turkmenistan, and in between with the city of Bukhara and Tashkent. That is the area where this civilization was staying and living. A common image of the Vikings that they were dressed in coarse and home-woven fabrics now is probably true for the daily dress, but when they wanted to display their richness and their value, social value, then they choose to have and be wearing silk. The silk is exactly as the traditional Persian patterns that were found in Central Asia. And that also creates incredible connections with what happened in other spheres. So when we have connections going around between a civilization, when there is missing of a kind of linguistic pattern, so or maybe the correctness to which we are more acquainted today, then it can happen situations that are a little bit paradoxical, like, for example, this mantle, the mantle of Roger II, which was the Norman king of Sicily, was made of red silk, and it has a beautiful embroidery made of silk and golden silk, red silk thread. Sorry, I need to take away. Oh no. So I need to just a second because my computer doesn't want to. Yes. Okay. That were applied by semi-precious and glass jewels. It formed the part of the imperial regalia for the Holy Roman Empire. So this mantle dates back of the 1134, and the garment was made in Palermo, Sicily, by Arab craftsmen. This mantle is an extraordinary element, still incredibly preserved. When you would look at the borders, so the hemicycle, you will see that there is an inscription, an Arabic inscription, all along the borders of the mantles under the camel drawing. So there is a lion defeating a camel, and then the tree of life. But then on the ground, you see that there is an inscription that becomes a decoration, but still it is an Arabic description. So what it was, it is kind of interesting or exceptional is, oh, sorry. Oh, no. I don't. Yes, it is that the coronation robe of the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire has a description that is linked to the Arabic word. So that comes from the direct tradition that the Arabic word and the Arabic textiles had. So the production in the Arabic world was using the calligraphy as a way for decorating, but also for communicating, for defining the thankfulness toward the God, Allah, of course, and toward the chiefs, or toward. So the calligraphy is the use of calligraphy on textiles in the Arabic world was, and is still today, very important and very peculiar, as we find it in many examples of the time. So when, and this created an incredible situation where the mantle of Roger II, then that is the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, then has an inscription in Arabic, and most importantly, it defines an Islamic thanks, gratefulness toward the God, the Arabic God. When we see, we have a beautiful painting of Albrecht Dürer that portrays Charlemagne, so the emperor from the 9th century. Of course, Albrecht Dürer from the 15th century has painted this Charlemagne Charlemagne in imagination, in his mind, but still has been willing to accurately depict this mantle on his shoulders, and is still ornated with beautiful golden damask and lampasses, together with embroidered gloves and all the regalia of the Holy Roman Empire. We can go on with some other example or inspiration of how the forms and shapes from the East were impacting and were taken. So we are talking not only about the production of textiles and patterns, but also about the expression of the dress and of the clothing culture. And when we talk about clothing culture for the West, for the European territory, they make a kind of whole bunch. So everything spreading from Maghreb to Egypt, to Saudi Arabia, to Lebanon, Palestine, and Israel, Syria, Turkey, up to Kazakhstan and Afghanistan, all was the same. It was something that was exotic, coming from far away. There were signs of a cultural expression that was coming from a different belonging, sense of belonging. So there is throughout the company. Sorry for the very bad quality of this drawing, but it is a depiction from a miniature book on the right in black and white, where you can see two figures that display one of the classical dresses from the 13th century, where we see elongated shaped arms that have a direct inspiration from the clothing, the pointed clothing and arms of the Central Asia, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan robes. We have, when we speak about this, then we need to keep in mind that there were a movement of imaginary clothing going around through the centuries. And this was up until the 15th century, when at a certain moment, some books and prints began to be produced. They were trying to replicate and define clothing in the different parts of the world. For example, Cesare Vecellio in Italy, it was the one creating this, one of the first book that was a repertory of the clothing. It was said degli abiti antichi e moderni delle diverse parti del mondo. So it means ancient, a book about the ancient and modern dress from the diverse parts of the world, divided in 2 books. So Cesare Vecellio engraved in Venice, which was of course the city that had most communication, and it was the open door toward the Asian, toward the Middle East. So Cesare Vecellio was creating in the late 16th century a book that contained 420 illustrations of costumes of exotic and domestic elements. So this first section is about European dress, divided into different European nations, but it was also including Ottoman, Turkish dresses, while also sections of Africa, Asia, and Persians, and the Moors and the Arabs. It was an excellent source to see how the Middle East was being interpreted and how the other parts of the world was being interpreted by the population of the 16th century. For example, here we see the bodyguard of a sultan from the 16th century, but also an Armenian noble from the 16th century. All these are prints from Cesare Vecellio, and also an archer bodyguard of a sultan. Of course, we can imagine by the feathers we see on the turban, on these elements, that it is a kind of imaginary, it is not an accurate, it is what it was valued as interesting for the West world than to be replicated. We can have a look at the way this man, this archer, is dressed in, and sporting his vest. The vest is being tucked in the belt. We will see how this tucking, so influence from the faraway lands, was not impacting only in the patterns, not only in the way clothing was shaped and constructed, so different fashions, but also in the attitude, in the way people were having an attitude. So the fact that you see the lower part of this vest, of this Turkish dress, depicted by in the Peregrinazione Voyage toward Turkey by Nicolai in 1585, then we see that this Turkish dress has been tucked and replied on the belt. That is a new way, a more informal way to interpret the dress. And exactly one few decades after, then we find a similar way in the costume, in the dress of the French court, where those who are the marquise or the fashionable courtiers in France, they like to interpret their dress in a more relaxed way, inspired by the way they have seen been done in the Middle East. So fashion examples were found throughout the East, and this illustration help spread different fashions for centuries to go. So above all in the 16th century and in the 17th century. This repertory of imaginary, which is replaced by Western sources, is an incredible framework and an incredible screenshot of how a society, late Renaissance society, was seeing the others, so the rest of the world. When we talk about fashion from the outside the European borders and also the Italian borders, then we need to understand that much is of the appeal was given by the layers, for different layers. For example, in this example of male dress. We see this gilet, a huge gilet that has fur inside, that has no arms, and this was typically inspired by the Ottoman Empire, a kind of doublet and vest that had no arms, and where you, by that means, you could see your clothing underneath, so displaying, if you wanted to display nice textiles in the lower part. Even here with the Henry VIII, which was the King of England in the middle of the 16th century, we see that the King of England has a lot of similarities, a lot of communities in the layering or on the superposition of different textile, and above all the absence of arms of different elements that are above, just as the sultans like this Mehmed III was displaying a few years later. So the significance of layering has a broader aesthetic and a spiritual concept, above all for the Middle East and the Asian world. So it is deeply embedded in the culture, wearing many layers always been a characteristic for a ceremonial and festive dress. It is a sign of wealth and status, creating a silhouette that is muffled to the body and equate luxurious dress with modest bulk. Because of course, if you have different layers and you can display a lot more different textiles, and thus your wealth can be enhanced. So you have a lot more screens where to display your possibility and economical possibility. In this picture, that again, I'm sorry, it is very difficult to understand. There are some of these men that are from Central Asia in the background that have a coned pointed hat. So this is to create a topic, a short cameo related to the hat. So even headdress was impacting and coming from Central Asia since the Middle Age has had a kind of curiosity impact, like the example of the hennin. Hennin is this typical pointed, high, elongated hat, so head decoration that women had in the northern countries, so in areas like the northern Flemish and France area, toward the end of the 14th century, early 15th century, then we can see that there is a direct inspiration, a direct influence from the headdress and the piece that was and still used in some of the Central Asia and also from Nordic Asian headdress, so decoration for the head. We see, you may have already noticed that there is a very direct influence. So that is just to demonstrate that there were impact from the way you would find in this more scenographic, but also in the way textiles began to be draped around the head in the Eastern way. So like the Ottoman Empire or also the Indian Empire, they used to drape and revolve textiles usually around in bulks around the head. So the address of this illustration from the middle of the 15th century in Northern Europe then confirms that there is also an inspiration about this trend. The Turkish dress has also been widely influential throughout the Islamic world, with elements of the Turkish dress that can be found in many of the inspiration or in many of the garments that were using above all indoors. So, for example, what it becomes to be called robe de chambre, or the dresses that are to be worn inside home, instead of being the official dress, the formal dress to be shown in society. Again, my computer doesn't want to collaborate. Yeah. When we have also veiling that normally has that has a long history, has a history that dates back from the Roman Empire, and then goes back to, for example, the different area civilization toward that were ruling through the Middle East. So with Christianity and Judaism and Islam appropriating of this veiling that was coming originally from also the tradition, the classical tradition, not only the Roman, but of course also the Greek tradition. And then through Islam, then it was assimilated from the Persian and Byzantine societies. So elite women in ancient Mesopotamia and in the Byzantine and Greek and Persian empires, they all wore veil. So veiling was a sign of respectability and high status. In ancient Mesopotamia, Assyria, veiling was meant to differentiate between respectable women and those who were publicly available. Female slaves, of course, and those who had not a high status were forbidden public explicitly to bear a veil. And so it is directly a strict, a very strict seclusion and definition. So by that means we know that throughout the history of art and this from Middle Age to Renaissance, the veiling of the Virgo, of the Virgin Mother in the Christian religion, then has absorbed all these elements of respectability and preciousness. So the fact that a veiled woman is the one that has virtues and has to be respected. With this passage, we can pass on an example. For we take China as a small cameo now, as an example for how an area was impacting in different stages and in different level of the Western evolution, in the Western story. In this manscape, that means it is a mantle, a short mantle, typical of the late 16th century. There is a Chinese silk velvet that is being used. This mantle, made with the Ming dynasty Chinese velvet, is instead is created and shaped in a purely European form. The textile gold thread is a typical Chinese style, and this is with the short and small regular geometrical patterns has created then and informed all a trend that lasted one century in the production of Italy and Spanish and Portuguese textile and fashion. Sorry. Oh. Yeah. Chinese influence is what is mostly known as by the Chinese style as les curiosités, les chinoiseries is a term that widely applies to furnitures, to pieces of art, porcelains, but also to textiles. So throughout the 18th century, there was a kind of Chinese folie going around in the European and Westward, where you would find Chinese-inspired textiles applied in all different settings. And like, for example, they were called turquerie or chinoiserie, and they were creating carousels and court masquerade, so like the picture that we were displaying at the beginning. And this impact or interest in the Oriental world through the direct image of the Chinese world then has lasted up to the early 20s, when copies and when there was a huge trend in the West fashion, in the production of the West fashion. But sometimes there is, as we said, a vague notion of the East, of the Chinese or the Indian world, that makes it possible for the West world to import and to manipulate somehow the production of textiles to their needs. So to the point that starting from the 16th, 17th century, there is a total new production in the West world, in the East world, where the colonies, the early developing colonies, like the Dutch companies or the British West Indian companies, so they were installing new productions in the areas where instead traditionally 1,000 years old production of textile was going on. So in India, above all, there is the Dutch market. There is the story of the Coromandel trend, so the Coromandel style. That means that designs were developed to meet the needs of individual European markets and to appeal to regional taste. Typical patterns were anecdotal, so we find vague references to India or so to Chinese pagodas or to flowers shaped in the Japanese way or in the Central Asia way. And although these new companies, the trade of the companies like the Dutch East Indian Trade Company, but also the English, the British trade companies like the French, they were to trade initially with pepper, spices, and other luxury goods. Then, of course, little bit, but almost at the beginning, they changed the amount of values that they were trading toward the use of textiles. So textiles and cottons were produced for the foreign markets, that means for the West, and they were distributed to European consumer in a way that then the West became a direct manager of this production, whether they were exploiting a production that was commercially flourishing in the East. A typical, a big story about this production created especially for the West world is represented by what is called the cashmere shawl, so the paisley shawls. So what you may have noticed, so there is at the beginning of the 19th century, so in the moment where Napoleon is having power, so there is a wild celebration of these shawls in Kashmir that are especially produced in India, in the area, Tibetan area of India. so the area of the Kashmir, as they say, and they began to have this small palm, the paisley palm, that is developed in different patterns and different forms, that then creates huge shawls that are, of course, made of cashmere, so they are extremely warm, and they become a luxury good, a crazy luxury good. So there was at the start of the 19th century, no greater status symbol for ladies in the royal courts of Europe than the woven paisley shawls from Kashmir, a far-off land rich in artistic talent, rich of history and culture. As kings, gentry, and explorers ventured in Orient, the Kashmir paisley became an expression of love that embodies mysticism of the East. So as we see then, it was developed quite immediately in different shapes, in different matters, in different proportions. Almost every portrait in the early first half of the 19th century has a shawl displayed. We see in this beautiful portrait also the shawl is wrapping up the small baby on the knees of the mother. And as well as then this created a unique trend that really in the history of fashion has been so thoroughly and so constant, where from the fact that you had shawls, as we have seen, that were covering like a huge cape, and then by a few decades, then it becomes to be to create a textile, a wall pattern. And of course, in order to have this huge wide textile, then in India, in Kashmir, there was installed a wool production that never existed before in the Kashmir original Indian production of shawls. So that was only destined to European to the Western world. We go toward the 19th century, where the 20th century, so where again the paisley remains above all in the 60s and in the 70s as an example of something that is far away, is a representation of the mystic city, the fascination of the Oriental world that very much was linked to the values that in the 70s were looked and sought after. In the Italian fashion, we have a company that is Etro. You may have known and heard of it, that has built his knowledge and his identity on the interpretation of this paisley trend, of this paisley pattern that still we find in the défilé, in Etro, in every défilé production. Orientalism trends in fashion in the 19th century cannot skip over Mariano Fortuny. Mariano Fortuny is a Venetian. He was from originally from the Iberian Peninsula, but he moved to Venice at the beginning of the 20th century. So by the early 20s and 10s, he was hugely famous for the dresses that he was developing, inspired not only by the old chitons, so the classical dress of the Greek on the Greek statues, but also by inspiring hugely from the Arabic and Middle East world. In these pictures, we can see how the impact of the Middle East world was being seen. There is a trend that is also in the shape the 20s, so the time when Mariano Fortesi was working, was also very impactful in the Parisian area, because there was, of course, it was the center of the artistic production all throughout the Europe, and by that means with theater, with ballet groups, many of the productions were inspired by the Chinoiserie or the Midsummer Night Dreams or other the Nuit de Sherazade, Les Ballets Russes were also very much had a huge role in importing topics and imaginary from the Central Asia. And so this pagoda style that was ravaging in the 20s, we still find in some of the impact, some of the production of even Italian fashion designers like this Romeo Gigli, that is directly inspired by the curiosité, Chinese curiosité. Of course, it is a metallic gaze, so a metallic tunic that is made also by Venetian glass. So Orientalism at its best, and maybe in the most extreme way. We pass through now in the contemporary, in the most recent collections, where we have also examples of the Chinese textile now being interpreted in the collections of Dolce & Gabbana for this ensemble. And we have also this Gianni Versace that has reinterpreted, and that was back in the 1994 collection of the sari, so the Indian sari, but imbued in the way Versace was viewing the female body and the woman attire. We have also examples from Valentino collection. Many of the Valentino collection has displayed a huge impact and huge influence from the Chinese world, like in this tunic, in the embroidered and black, how do you call it, bead embroidered tunic. And also with this tailleur that has an incredibly beautiful decoration inspired by the coromandel. So this decoration chinoiserie that was vaguely referring to the Chinese word. It is all for this first part. If we want to have a few minutes, like a couple of minutes of a pause, so we can have a glass of water for those who want, or have a little bit of stretch. For those who want to ask questions, it is a good moment, and we can continue in, let's say, 3 minutes. Thank you. Okay. Very well, we can continue. Thank you. So we take this second part of the discussion and we go toward the meaning of colors, because this is an element that has a huge impact and huge relevance in everything that is connected to the perception and the value of both fashion and textiles ever since we can imagine that we can define that our perception of colors is for sure very much different from the ones that societies in the Middle Age in different civilization were having. So it is what we experience since we were born. We are all born in the 20th century. So for sure, we have no knowledge or no sensibility about how difficult and how luxurious can a dark, deep dark velvet color dyed in black color, or a huge, a bright red, or a brilliant blue, vibrant blue, was having on, for example, on men and women in the Middle Age. And in fact, when we look at any painting of that time, we need to bear in mind that there is a single element or person that is wearing a color by chance. So the color on the bodies displayed was having a significance and was having a very special meaning and definition. For example, black and red were among the colors that were most expensive, and of course equalize on the same level of gold and silver threads. So they were most referred to kings, popes, bishops, saints. Also, when we look at paintings from the Middle Age, we normally see that Virgin Mary or the saints have beautiful red robe and maybe a mantle that is in bright blue. And that is due to the fact that these colors were very difficult to obtain, very expensive to be produced, and above all, they were very difficult to maintain the color and the brilliancy throughout for many years. So when we look at this beautiful procession of the Middle King, it is a painting of the early Renaissance, and we see the king on the riding the horse, and he's displaying a cape that has black velvet sizzled with silver thread, and he's the only one displaying this, whether the pageants or the ones, the boys working for him, they are displaying Damascus and of course beautiful textiles, but none of them has reached the decoration, the colors. For example, the arms, also we can see in the arms is displaying a silver, golden thread, but with the base of kermesy, of grana or red, huge red. So since the Roman Empire, we know that the basic colors was the white, the natural color, and then there was a ribbon of red band that was, or the black band, that were defining the different status of the hierarchy, religious and political hierarchy. When we start to have the production put into place in the different Italian cities and republics, then it is immediate that not only the producer of textiles are usually assume the major importance, but also those who are dyeing the textiles. They have corporation. They have a huge power between each other and between the different corporations, because they are most important and crucial for the quality of the production of the textiles. And this knowledge has an origin in the Central Asia, again, thanks to the connection between the countries, between the republics, so Genoa and Venice, together also with Pisa. They were importing and replicating in Europe what they were trading and buying in the Middle East. So the alum was an element that is most important for the quality of the colors, and it was used in the Central Asia, and then discovered a huge mineral deposit in the area of Tuscany and the central Italy, so that this alum element that was crucial as a mordant to fix the dye, fix the colors on the textiles, then it could be applied, it could be become a central in the production of textiles in Italy. Its use spread in Italy, especially after the discovery of rich deposits in southern Tuscany and in upper Lazio. The best was the rock aluminium obtained from the alumite, a basic hydrated potassium, and the alum, in addition to permanently fixing the color on all kinds of textile fibers, gave an illuminating power that made the products particularly appreciated on the market. For these qualities, it was an object of an intense trade that linked to the extraction in areas and in major Italian centers. So, okay. Don't know if you may have heard about this alum, because there are also produced area of production of extraction is the ones in the area where you're living. So you may have heard of it. So was this potassium alum really essential? And now often was is used in the textile manufacture. There are documents that represent and define that in the 14th and 15th century in Tuscany, both alum, and wood ash was imported and stored in huge quantities. There was a huge demand, and at least in Florence, the importance of alum grew significantly in the last decade of the 14th century up to the 15th century, when the production of woolen clothes and other luxurious patterns was developed in parallel with the silk industry. Thanks to the use of grain and crimson, that was the colors for the red, these dyes had to be tainted and dyed with the use of alum in order to become so brilliant and intense and stable as a color. Dye and mordant then were so essential for the manufacture of clothes, to the point that in the middle of the 14th century, the Florentine Wool Guild, so Corporazione della Lana, it means the corporation the wool producer, that was a very powerful association of textile entrepreneurs. They decided to set up a warehouse, so a storage of the city, for only to store alum and ash, for the city to have this deposit, because it was so fundamental that the city needed to have a stash of this material. Specific officials and ambassadors were ensured to manage this quantity. So they were called ufficiali della tinta, so dyeing officials of the dyeing corporations, and they were elected, and they were permanently, they had an high status. They were included in the mandate of these ufficiali della tinta, also ambassadors, and they were sent established outdoors, so in the Middle East, and they had mandate to buy anywhere in the world any kind of quantity they could find of this alum. So by this means, we understand how important it was. Above all, because alum was fundamental for the cotton manufacturing. So the tanning of the blue was a very important production in Tuscany, and also in the central area like Arezzo, Cortona, and San Sepolcro, in the cities like Perugia, e Assisi, and Todi. These areas were the center for Italy, where the blue, a special kind of blue, the one that is called guado, you see in the second line, Isatis tintoria, it was the most important and prestigious blue obtained in the early and Middle East and early Renaissance, Middle Age and early Renaissance. It is obtained by flowers, a plant that is macerated, it is mixed with water, and it's extremely elaborated and long procedure and process. And the center of this production was Assisi and the center Italy. Also so when we go through, we keep looking at the blue, because this is the blue of this Isatis tintoria, that was an extremely valuable color, this brilliant blue that we see, that is totally different from the blue on the so the two men on the background have this blue, brilliant blue displayed on their robe, while the first one on the kneeling on the floor has another blue that is for the people at the time had a totally different meaning, even if for us it has a similar, for us it's a blue, a different tone of the blue, but for people at the time this blue was totally different. The blue, if you want to have a look at Piero della Francesca paintings from now on, you can notice how much blue there is in these paintings. It's because Piero della Francesca comes from the center area of Italy, so from Perugia, Assisi, San Sepolcro, and he was the son of a producer of guado, of this fantastic blue thing. So he was coming from a wealthy family, and then thus, even though he was not continuing his father's work, so the producer of this wood, this guado element, Isatis tintoria matter, but then he was using it abundantly in his painting. So next time that you have a look at Piero della Francesca, check it on the blue and the kind of blue that he uses, because they become and they display a sign of how impactful, important was this kind of blue in the Italian central in his society, with his contemporaries. Of course, then there is also the white, so the absence of the color, that has an important reference, because it is with the richness of the dresses and the impact of the East, then we have it connected with the golden thread and the silver thread. So once we have an absence of colors of somehow in a rich and color, the absence of colors is mostly connected with the silver thread or the golden thread. Like we see also here in this picture of the marriage of a Doria lady, so from Genoa, that is, she's marrying with a typical Spanish inspired dress with a textile embroidered entirely in silver and golden threads. Well, the white, we can go a little bit farther and quicker toward the black. Black has an incredible important relevance since the black has a very dyeing textiles, both wool or silk in black, has a chemical, provokes a chemical reaction because to have an intense black, you need to use before you could have chemical modern dyes. So it was impossible to obtain a dark and impactful deep color if not with the extreme use of metallic mordant that were corrosive and could then break easily the fibers, so both the silk and the wool. So having investing on the black dress, on black, it was a display of wealth and capacity, economical capacity, because of course those who didn't have the possibility, they were not able to afford such a color. And Genoa was among the cities that was producing the most prestigious and beautiful velvet and dark colors. It has remained in much of the portraits of the time of Genoa nobility. And also, yeah, we will see here some of the nobility of the time, all displayed in Genoa with this beautiful color that was shiny, was intense, and was very difficult. And the fact that it was so beautiful, it was thanks to the presence of Genoa as a port, as a trading market, where both the Tuscany mining presences of alum were available, but also Genoa could also afford to trade with alum coming from the Central Asia. And here we see Genoese textile producer that they are these two on the left, kneeling in front of Louis XIV, Louis XIV, where they are going to make trade toward the French king, but they display, and they are the only ones fully dressed in black because they are textile producers coming from Genoa, and they are dealing with what they know they produce at best. We have examples of yellow, but we can go faster, maybe trying to go on the red. The red was a color that throughout history has had a huge impact. There's the purpura or rosso di tiro, which is extracted from small animals picked on the area or on the beach, so marine animal, small animal that has it was already collected in the Roman times in the area where also you live, so in the Middle East. And in the instead the red that is being used mostly in the in Middle Age and in the Renaissance is called the grana, so the one that is extracted from the kermes, the a small insect from the family of the Kermesidae, and is to be found on the tree of oak trees. The red, as throughout history of fashion, has had a different perception of what than we have. For example, inside the scope of red, in the past there was also included the pink. So, for example, here we see the mantle that is those two mantles have two different shades of what we could call the pink or light violet, and where you have tunics that are dark red or orange red. All these for the past, in the past, was applying to the same color that was a red, because once you had the color, the deep color original, you would have a bath of color. So the dyeing bath was the first. So when you dyed for the first time, the first cloth was coming out very dark and purpureal, and sometimes even violet or purple. And then the second, the third, the fourth, they were displaying and getting, so the textiles were getting lighter and lighter tones of red. So from the intense red to the pink, all through the different stages. And red, to this also pink definition, was a color in the Middle Age, in Renaissance, mostly used for men. So that was displaying not only religious area or ambient, but also in others, in the civil world. Red, of course, has kept a very powerful image. So even today, when we see, this is from a défilé from Valentino, but also that has a trademark, red can, to be defined and identified, most of the time the companies today have to register, so to patent the kind of tone, exactly the Pantone they want to use, in order to not to be used by other companies. And this is how Valentino has registered the exact amount evaluation. So there is a standard color called Rosso Valentino that has been registered, that only the brand Valentino can use. Just to mention also, Prada has since the 90s been the minimalistic brand, but also in the moment they were using and creating a reinterpretation of the brand, they investigated the use of the red line and the red as a single trademark for their unicity. And here we are. I think we are done. If you have questions, I'm most glad to answer to you. You can write in the chat, or maybe just take off. I think you should be able to take and put on your microphone. Thank you for the attention. No questions. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if from the Institute, they want. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you for the attention and kept listening.
Ringraziamo la dottoressa Sisley Schio per il suo intervento.
Grazie a voi.
Grazie a lei e anche a tutti voi che ci avete seguito. אנחנו מודים לכולכם שהקשבתם להרצאה של דוקטור סקיו. עכשיו אנחנו מחדשים את ההזמנה להרצאה הבאה שתתקיים ב-9 למרץ, יום חמישי. והנושא של ההרצאה הבאה יהיה le regole del Made in Italy, החוקים של ה-Made in Italy. Quindi rinnoviamo di nuovo l'invito a tutti voi per la prossima conferenza. Ringraziamo di nuovo la dottoressa Schio, grazie per averci seguito e alla prossima conferenza da parte dell'Istituto Italiano di Cultura di Haifa. Buonasera a tutti.
Buonasera a tutti, grazie.
Grazie mille, arrivederci.
Grazie, arrivederci.
Grazie a voi.
Grazie mille.
Grazie.